Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The storm data was right there on the monitors. Spikes of electromagnetic interference, erratic wind shear, turbulence readings no algorithm could explain. Yet when Sarah cleared her throat and tried to speak, the room went quiet in a way that wasn't listening. It was waiting for her to be dismissed. Captain Hayes didn't even glance at the numbers in her hands. He waved his pen like a conductor silencing the wrong instrument. "This is a job for real pilots, Lieutenant," he said, his voice carrying that smugness that could fill a room more than thunder ever could. "Why don't you file the weather reports and let the men handle the crisis?" The humiliation landed sharper than the static in her headset. Around the table, a few junior officers looked away, their eyes flicking down to their notepads, unwilling to meet hers. She had seen that look before. Embarrassment not for her mistake, because she hadn't made one, but for the audacity of her speaking up. Sarah lowered her gaze, jaw tight, hands tightening around the paper she had spent 3 hours assembling. Outside, the mountain storm gathered more violence by the minute. Inside, she sat silent, the weather girl in a room of seasoned pilots who had never flown blind through the Cascade Peaks on instinct alone. She had, more times than she could count. But here, her hours in the cockpit counted for nothing. The clock ticked louder than any voice in the room. Every second was one more second those 8 missing pilots, men she knew by name, were running out of altitude, fuel, and time. And every second, command buried itself deeper into procedure. What Hayes didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Sarah wasn't going to let protocol be the last word. She had never planned to be a soldier. Her earliest memories weren't of barracks or bases, but of her father's voice inside the cramped cockpit of a Coast Guard plane, pointing at the clouds rolling like gray oceans between mountain walls. "You don't fight the wind, kiddo. You dance with it." She learned the steps before she learned multiplication. She could tell a downdraft by the way a hawk's wings trembled, predict a pressure shift by the sudden stillness of trees. Where other kids memorized pop lyrics, she traced contour lines on topographical maps pinned across her bedroom wall. She understood something most adults never would. The sky wasn't an enemy. It was a living thing. If you listened, it told you everything. That gift became her burden. Teachers dismissed it as obsession. Peers thought it strange, even laughable. But her father, Michael, never once told her she was too young to know what she knew. He flew into storms others turned from and always came home, not because he was reckless, but because he listened. And he made sure she listened, too. So when she joined the military at 18, she already carried an education no academy could teach. Her logbooks filled faster than her classmates could finish their first simulator runs. Crosswind landings, emergency descents, rescues through fog-thick valleys, Sarah logged them like diary entries. Instructors whispered that she was intuitive to the point of uncanny. Some called her a natural, others reckless. She ignored both labels. She just listened to the sky, the way her father had shown her. But talent had never been armor against arrogance. From day one in uniform, she noticed it, the sideways looks, the slow smiles from men who measured her by her frame before her flight hours. They let her carry the reports, hand over the charts, but not lead. Not yet. Not until she had earned her place. Now at Command Center Alpha, the cycle repeated with brutal precision. 3 hours earlier, the storm had rolled in out of nowhere. 8 fighter jets on a training mission had vanished from radar, their last transmissions garbled by interference. 8 pilots, Major and his wingmen, trained, decorated, as good as they came. Gone. The search patterns Hayes outlined were textbook, wide grids, sweeping orbits, systematic passes, the kind that looked thorough on paper but meant nothing in these mountains. The Cascade Range didn't care about textbook grids. It bent air currents into traps, spun invisible whirlpools in the sky. Sarah knew those ridges like the back of her hand. If the pilots were alive, they weren't scattered randomly. They were pinned inside the storm's teeth. She had seen it once before, years ago on a civilian rescue. The way an aircraft could be forced into a spiral by winds no radar picked up, until the pilot either punched through in perfect timing or spiraled down into rock. That memory crawled up her spine now, a cold weight she couldn't shake. Her gut told her exactly where the missing flight was. Devil's Canyon, a death corridor as the locals called it. Every instinct screamed at her to say it again, louder this time. But she remembered Hayes's smirk, the ripple of laughter when he called her enthusiastic. Enthusiasm didn't save lives. Listening did. So she kept listening. She studied the interference patterns scrolling across her monitor, the jagged peaks of electromagnetic noise that surged and fell like tides. And there, it was subtle, but it was there. A rhythm. Every 3 hours, the storm's chaos faltered just for a window. 45 minutes, maybe less. Enough for one shot. Enough to slip in before the sky slammed shut again. Her pulse quickened. She could almost hear her father's voice. That's the mountain telling you when it's willing to let go. You don't wait for permission. You move. She looked up. Around the room, voices clashed, Hayes barking orders, meteorologists muttering confusion, pilots shifting in frustration. No one was looking at her. No one cared. And that's when the anger bloomed, not hot but cold, steady. The kind that didn't shout, the kind that decided. 8 lives were out there, trapped in the dark. The men in this room would bury them in protocols, grid lines, reports. She couldn't let that happen. But the cost of acting, of disobeying, wasn't small. A career could end in a heartbeat. Disobedience could mean court-martial. And yet, what was a career weighed against 8 fathers, sons, brothers waiting in the storm? Sarah pressed her palms against the table, feeling the vibration of the generators humming beneath the floor. She steadied her breath. This isn't about proving yourself. It's about them. A fragment of radio static burst across the speakers. Everyone froze. Then, faint, fractured words. Critical fuel state. Attempting emergency. Northeast Valley. GPS unreliable. The voice dissolved, swallowed by static, but it was enough. They were alive somewhere, barely. Sarah's chest tightened. She could almost picture them, cockpits rattling, needles spinning useless, fuel lights blinking red. And command. Command was still arguing over grid sectors. Her choice had already been made. She didn't stand up. Not yet. Instead, she folded her papers, slid them into her flight jacket, and whispered a promise only the storm could hear. If no one else will, I will. And as the command center buzzed on, blind to her decision, Sarah, the woman told to file paperwork while men handled the crisis, prepared to walk into the storm that had already swallowed 8 of the best. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. She had seen this exact rhythm once before, years ago, in the Olympic Mountains. She knew the way it ended for those who waited too long. And she wasn't going to let history repeat itself. How do you fight for a voice no one wants to hear? Sarah sat at her assigned console, surrounded by the soft glow of monitors. Her hands hovered over the weather readouts like a pianist above silent keys. Numbers scrolled, winds shifted, interference spiked. She read it the way others read a diary. Every line told her something. Every fluctuation carried meaning. But across the room, Captain Hayes droned on, pointing at a tactical map that meant nothing in the Cascades. A neat grid spread across the range, textbook perfect, tragically useless. Systematic coverage ensures we don't miss any sectors, he said, chest rising as though volume equaled authority. Sarah knew better. Grids didn't matter when nature bent the rules. In these mountains, winds tore across ridges in patterns that laughed at geometry. Rescue aircraft following Hayes's plan wouldn't find the pilots. They'd only risk joining them. Her throat tightened. She had to say something again. "Sir," she began, soft but steady. A hush brief, eyes turned expectant. Hayes turned slower, irritation etched into his smirk. "Yes, Lieutenant," his tone stretched her rank like a leash. "The interference patterns," she said carefully, "they're cycling, not random. If we time a launch during a stability window, we can penetrate the storm's core. Otherwise, he cut her off with a laugh. Not cruel, not sharp, worse. Amused. Lieutenant, our pilots are trained to operate advanced radar. I think they can handle a little turbulence without waiting for your windows. Laughter rippled. Not everyone laughed, but enough to sting. Sarah swallowed the heat rising in her chest. She kept her eyes on the monitors, because if she looked at anyone else, the humiliation might show. But what Hayes didn't know was that she wasn't speculating. She was remembering. She was 16 again, the prop wash of her father's buffeting her hair as they cut through a narrow canyon north of Bay. The radio crackled warnings from the tower. Too risky, too turbulent, stay grounded. Her father ignored it, eyes steady on the horizon. Dad, she said, gripping the yoke with white knuckles. They said it's too dangerous. Michael only smiled. They said dangerous because they don't see what we see. Look out there. She forced herself to glance. The clouds shifted like curtains parting for an instant, sunlight revealing a break, a brief gap in the chaos. Feel it, he said, and she did. The air smoothed for seconds only, a corridor. He nosed the plane through before the gap slammed shut behind them. Her heart pounded. He chuckled softly. You can't always wait for permission, kiddo. Sometimes permission comes and goes before anyone else even notices. She never forgot it. That window had been their only chance. And now, watching the interference spikes dance across her military screen, she knew the same truth was unfolding again. The storm outside wasn't just weather. It was a living puzzle, shifting pieces with deadly precision. Sarah traced them with her eyes, her mind calculating without trying. Every spike of static, every drop of barometric pressure, every sudden lull. It was all part of the rhythm. The missing pilots had flown right into it. She could almost see their jets spinning in that invisible funnel, instruments useless, instincts frayed by exhaustion. She imagined Major, steady voice masking fear, trying to lead his men blind. And she imagined the silence after their final broken transmission. They were still alive. She believed that with every part of her, but believing wouldn't bring them home. Acting would. Hayes kept talking, others kept nodding, time bled away. Sarah's hands trembled not from fear but from the pressure of decision. Speak again. Be dismissed again. Or wait, let the storm close, let 8 men vanish into the mountains because she was afraid of being wrong. Her chest ached. She remembered every lecture about discipline, about chain of command. Disobeying wasn't just career suicide, it was betrayal of the very system she had sworn to serve. But what good was discipline if it killed those it was meant to protect? A voice at her side startled her. Lieutenant. She turned. Captain Tall, weathered, eyes sharper than most in the room. He leaned just close enough to glance at her monitors. Your data looks different from what we've been using. What are you seeing? Her heart leapt. Someone was asking, someone was listening. Cycles, she whispered, careful not to draw Hayes's attention. Every 3 hours interference dips. Stability window 45 minutes, maybe less. That's the only chance we'll have. His brow furrowed, studying the numbers. A flicker of respect crossed his face. He didn't laugh, he didn't dismiss. He simply asked, how confident are you? Her voice didn't shake. Very. Before more could be said, Hayes barked his next order. Gave her a subtle nod before stepping back, but the message was clear. I hear you. It was the first thread of hope she'd felt since the storm began. Hours dragged. Rescue teams launched, followed their grids, returned empty. Reports stacked. Radar failure, turbulence too severe, no contact. Every failure confirmed what Sarah already knew. At 21:47 hours, her reading spiked, then dipped. The next stability window was opening. She felt it like a pulse under her skin. She rose. Captain, she called across the command center, louder than she meant. Heads turned. Her chest hammered, but she pressed on. Window opening in 12 minutes. If we launch now, we can break through. Silence. Hayes spun, face darkening, eyes burning. Lieutenant, you are out of line. His voice cracked the air like a whip. Rescue operations will proceed according to established protocol, not based on theoretical weather predictions. Her ears rang. She had crossed a line. But stepped forward. Sir, her predictions have been accurate all day. If she says there's a window. Enough, Hayes snapped. His composure wavered for the first time and the room knew it. The tension split the air, half of command watching him, half watching her. Sarah felt her hands curl into fists at her sides. She couldn't let this end here. She walked straight to the central table, her analysis clutched in her hands. She set it down, spreading charts and figures for everyone to see. Sir, she said, voice firm but still respectful, request permission to present time-critical intelligence that directly affects rescue safety. It wasn't just defiance. It was a direct challenge, masked in perfect protocol. If he refused now in front of them all, he wasn't dismissing her. He was dismissing the data. Hayes glared torn, seconds dragged, finally through clenched teeth. 2 minutes, make it brief. Sarah's chest lifted with a slow breath. She pointed at the patterns on her screen. This storm is generating interference cycles tied to topography. Stable windows occur every 3 hours. The next opens in 10 minutes. We have 45 minutes to get in and get out before systems fail again. That's the only shot. The room hushed. Even the civilian consultant, Dr. Warren, leaned closer, her eyes widening. She's right. These patterns explain the equipment failures. If her timing is accurate, this could work. Checked his watch. Sir, if we don't launch now, we lose the chance, and the pilots don't have 3 more hours. A murmur rippled. For the first time, Hayes's authority cracked. He looked at Sarah, truly looked, and behind his eyes she saw it, fear. The radio crackled. A faint voice broke through. Critical fuel state, attempting emergency landing, then static. They were alive, barely. Sarah stepped forward. Sir, I volunteer to guide the mission. My analysis is the only reason we'll make it in and out. Let me fly. The words shocked even her. The room froze. Hayes's jaw tightened. But's eyes lit with resolve. Sir, she's right. We can do this, but only with her. The storm outside roared against the glass. The countdown had begun. Permission or not, Sarah knew she was going. And for the first time, Hayes hesitated. What does it feel like to stake your life on someone else's instincts? Captain asked her that with his eyes, not his mouth, as the helicopter blades began to spool. The storm's growl pressed against the hangar doors, rattling metal as though it wanted to come in and finish what it started. Sarah tightened the straps of her harness and kept her gaze fixed on the instruments she carried, portable weather sensors, handheld monitors, maps she had scribbled on by hand. Tools no one in command had trusted, until now. Said, his voice calm but carrying steel. Understand this, if your window's wrong, we don't just fail, we die with them. She met his stare, her heart hammered but her voice came out steady. I know. He studied her a beat longer, then nodded. Good, then let's bring them home. The hangar doors groaned open. Outside, night swallowed everything. The storm flashed jagged light across black mountains. The helicopter lifted, blades biting at air heavy with static. For a heartbeat, Sarah thought of her father's voice. Don't fight the wind, dance with it. They rose into darkness. The cabin shook as turbulence hit them head-on. Every jolt felt like a giant's hand shaking the aircraft. Knuckles whitened on the cyclic. His co-pilot called out altitudes, his voice tight but controlled. Sarah kept her eyes on the monitor strapped to her lap, watching the interference curve like a heartbeat. We're entering the window, she called over the roar. His eyes flicked to her, navigation holding. For now, she said, 37 minutes of stability left. After that, everything fails. The crew exchanged glances. 37 minutes. That wasn't much time to find 8 pilots scattered in black valleys. Not much time at all. Sarah forced her breath steady. Focus. Don't let the weight crush you. The interference spikes dipped again, right on schedule. Her prediction was holding. A small spark of relief steadied her hands. "You're dead on," said, his voice raised against the storm. "Never seen anything like it. Keep talking me through it." Her throat tightened. Finally, someone trusted her. The helicopter pushed deeper into the Cascade Mountains. Outside, the world was a chaos of black ridges and sudden lightning. Winds shifted without warning, buffeting them sideways toward unseen cliffs. Sarah watched the subtle cues, the flick of vapor trails, the angle of tree sways when lightning lit them for an instant. She called out changes before instruments caught them. "Wind shear ahead 10 seconds. Corrected instantly, avoiding a violent jolt that might have spun them sideways. The co-pilot turned wide-eyed. "How did you?" "She listens," said grimly, fighting the cyclic. "Just fly." Sarah's pulse pounded. This was what she had been made for, not the humiliation of briefing rooms, but this. Reading the sky like scripture, guiding them where machines failed. Every second proved her instincts right, but every second also ticked away their window. The first crackle of hope came suddenly. "Contact," shouted, eyes snapping to his display. "Emergency beacon, bearing 270, distance 8 kilometers. Sarah checked her portable scanner. The signal was faint but real. Her chest tightened with both relief and fear. Multiple beacons, that's them. The crew erupted in tension and movement, radios switching, navigation recalibrating, lights readying. Sarah felt her heart surge, but she forced herself calm. Not yet. This is just the first step. The searchlight swept the valley below. Lightning lit the ground in brief, violent flashes, broken shapes of metal scattered across rock. 4 aircraft, down but intact enough to have survived impact. There, angled the nose down. Sarah's breath caught. She saw figures moving tiny against the jagged terrain. Survivors. "To Alpha 7, do you copy?" His voice boomed through the comms. Static, then faint, strained. "This is 6 survivors, 2 critically injured, lost contact with others, somewhere upslope." The words rattled through the cabin. They weren't just alive, they were waiting. Sarah gripped the seat, chest tight with sudden hope. "We can do this. We can save them." But as the helicopter hovered, reality hit. The valley walls loomed like jagged knives, winds slamming down in unpredictable bursts. Hovering here was suicide. "Bark, talk to me." She scanned her readings. "Crosswinds shifting every 10 seconds. You'll need constant corrections. I'll call them out." He didn't question, he trusted. The winch deployed. Rescue crew descended through storm-whipped darkness. Sarah called wind shifts like a heartbeat. Left gust 3 seconds hold, now downwash brace. Moved with her calls, his hands a blur. Sweat beaded his brow. The helicopter trembled on the edge of control, but it held. "Package secure," came the crew's voice. The first injured pilot rose on the cable, pale but alive. Sarah's breath caught as the man was pulled aboard. One saved, but her stomach twisted. 6 more here, 2 more somewhere else. And only she glanced at her clock, 21 minutes left before the window slammed shut. "Time," demanded. 18 minutes of stability, she said, throat dry. "After that, navigation's gone." "Not enough," the co-pilot muttered. "It has to be," Sarah whispered. One by one, they pulled survivors aboard. 4 walked, bruised but able. 2 were critical stretcher lifts, agonizingly slow. Sarah's chest ached with every second wasted. When the last was inside, looked at her. Time to spare. She glanced at her readings. Her stomach dropped. 14 minutes. His jaw clenched, and the other too. Sarah scanned the topography. Upslope, northeast valley, her instincts screamed it. 3 kilometers that way, we don't have long. His gaze hardened. "Then we go." The co-pilot shook his head. "Sir, we're at capacity." "We don't leave them," snapped. Sarah's chest swelled. Relief, respect, fear. He was going to try, and it was her job to get them there. They lifted, the helicopter groaning under the weight. Sarah's sensors flickered with instability. The window was closing. Every gust now threatened catastrophe. She leaned forward, eyes fixed on the monitors, calling out corrections faster, sharper. Flew as though tied to her words. Then through the static another beacon ping. Weak, barely there, but real. There, Sarah pointed, voice breaking with urgency. Beacon 78, 2 kilometers, that's them. Lightning split the sky, illuminating wreckage clinging to a rocky slope. The helicopter tilted toward it. Sarah's hands gripped the console, heart hammering. Said his voice low and grim, "We're out of time, can we make it?" Her readings shook, interference spiking. The cycle was ending. 7 minutes, she whispered. And as the storm roared around them, every life hung on those minutes. What happens when the clock runs out before you're done? Sarah's screen stuttered with interference, the once clear rhythm now breaking apart into jagged noise. Her window, the one chance she had fought so hard to prove, was closing. And yet the beacon blinked weakly ahead, calling through the storm. The last 2 pilots were out there, alive, waiting. His voice cut through the cabin. 7 minutes, that's all we've got. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Every fiber of training screamed turn back, save the 6 you already have. But her instincts, the thing her father had taught her to trust over everything, told her one truth. If they left now, 2 men would die. "We can make it," she said, though her voice was quieter than she wanted. Glanced at her, reading the fear in her eyes. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Then we try." The helicopter climbed toward the secondary valley, rotors screaming against shifting winds. Below, jagged slopes glistened with rain. Lightning revealed twisted wreckage lodged against a cliffside, what was left of Alpha 75. Metal torn like paper, but a beacon still blinked. "Target in sight," the co-pilot reported, though his voice was tight with doubt. Sarah checked her readings, her stomach dropped. 4 minutes. After that, navigation's gone. Didn't flinch. Crew prep for high-risk extraction. Call the winds, don't miss. She nodded, fingers trembling on the console. This wasn't theory anymore. Every second mattered. Every wrong call could kill them all. The helicopter settled into hover, barely clearing the cliff wall. Rain hammered the windshield, wind clawed at the tail. Sarah's sensors flickered, unreliable, but she trusted the signs outside, shifting fog, swirls of debris. "Left gust coming, 3 seconds, she called. Corrected just before the blast hit. The aircraft lurched, then steadied. The winch operator lowered a rescuer, cable swaying violently. Sarah's chest clenched as the man dangled above jagged rock. "Wind shear, 5 o'clock, correct right." Obeyed instantly. The helicopter steadied barely. The rescuer touched down beside the wreck. Static filled the comms. Then, survivor located, conscious but severely injured. Sarah exhaled, but her relief vanished instantly. Another voice crackled in. 2 bodies, one alive, one not. The cabin went silent. His face hardened. Sarah forced herself to keep calling winds. She couldn't afford grief now. "Stabilizing survivor," the rescuer said. "Extraction in progress." Sarah's screen buzzed, interference surging. 2 minutes, she whispered louder the second time. 2 minutes. The rescuer's voice strained. "Patience critical, need more time." "We don't have it," snapped. "Emergency lift, stabilize in air." The cable strained as the injured pilot rose, limp in his harness. Wind slammed the helicopter, nearly smashing it into the cliff. Sarah's heart stopped. "Crosswind, left now," she screamed. Yanked the controls. The helicopter tilted hard, rotors screaming. The stretcher swung wildly, missing the rock face by feet. "Package secure," the crew confirmed, dragging the unconscious pilot aboard. Time barked. Sarah stared at her readings. Her blood went cold. 30 seconds before interference returns. Hold on, growled, pulling them from the valley. The helicopter climbed, straining under the weight of 9 souls. Navigation screens flickered, then died. Lights blinked failure. Radios buzzed static. "We're blind," the co-pilot said, panic cracking his voice. "All we've got is her," said, eyes locked on Sarah. "Guide us." Her hands shook, but she forced her breath calm. She looked out the windshield, searching for signs, how clouds curled, how rain shifted, how lightning flashed against the ridges. Her father's voice echoed in memory. "The mountain will tell you, if you're brave enough to listen." She swallowed hard. "Bank right, follow the ridge. There's a crosswind tunnel, it'll push us out." Obeyed without hesitation. The helicopter swayed, groaned, but the pressure eased. Sarah's chest loosened. It was working. Her instincts were right. Again and again she called it. "Drop 5 degrees. Hold. Gust coming, brace," and again, flew as though tethered to her words. The co-pilot glanced at her, disbelief softening into awe. "How the hell do you see this?" Sarah didn't answer. She didn't have words for it. She just felt it. The storm was alive and she spoke its language. The return flight was agony. Every minute dragged like an hour. Interference tore their instruments apart, reducing the helicopter to little more than blades and instinct. Rain lashed like bullets. The rescued men groaned, injured but alive. The cabin smelled of fuel, blood, and fear. Sarah didn't let herself blink. She called every shift, every subtle cue, her voice hoarse, her body trembling. Finally, lights cut through the dark. The base, Command Center Alpha. Exhaled, his first real breath since they'd lifted. "We made it." The helicopter slammed onto the tarmac. Medical teams rushed forward, pulling survivors into waiting ambulances. 8 pilots, alive. Sarah's body sagged with exhaustion. Relief crashed through her, so heavy she could barely breathe. They had done it. But even as cheers erupted around her, even as officers crowded the landing pad, she couldn't shake the tremor in her chest. They had made it back by seconds, by instinct, by listening where no one else had. Hayes stood waiting, his face pale, his authority cracked. He met her eyes, really met them for the first time. "Lieutenant," he said formally, voice stripped of arrogance, "your analysis saved 8 lives tonight. I owe you an apology, and much more." Sarah didn't answer. Words felt empty against the storm still echoing inside her bones. She turned, watching the stretchers roll toward the medical bay. 8 men who would see tomorrow because she hadn't stayed silent. Her father's voice whispered through the roar of her heartbeat. "Sometimes permission never comes. Sometimes you take it." Sarah closed her eyes. She had acted, and because of it they were alive. But deep down, she knew the storm had changed everything. Why did silence feel heavier than applause? The hangar lights were blinding after the storm's darkness, the noise deafening in a different way. Engines roared, medics shouted orders, stretchers rolled past in hurried rhythm. And above it all there was cheering, clapping hands, raised voices, relief spilling into celebration. Sarah stood in the middle of it, her flight jacket soaked, her hair plastered against her face. The sound washed over her but never reached inside. 8 men lived tonight. That should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like weight pressing harder onto her chest. She caught glimpses of the rescued pilots as medics rushed them past. Major's eyes fluttered open long enough to meet hers. He whispered something she couldn't hear before slipping into unconsciousness. Another pilot gripped her sleeve weakly as they wheeled him away. His lips mouthed "thank you." Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe those words, but part of her still heard the broken transmission, still saw the jagged peaks illuminated by lightning, still felt the storm's rage pressing against their fragile craft. Survival didn't erase the memory. "Lieutenant." The voice snapped her back. Captain Hayes stood before her, uniform still crisp, though his eyes betrayed the storm he hadn't flown through. For the first time his gaze didn't hold condescension. It held something like shame. "Your contribution tonight was critical," he said carefully. Each word weighed like a stone he wasn't used to lifting. "You were right. I was wrong." Around them, officers paused, listening. Hayes cleared his throat. "8 men are alive because of you. The command will recognize this." Sarah held his stare. She waited for the satisfaction she thought she would feel, the vindication of hearing him admit it. But it didn't come. His words slid off like rain on glass. Recognition meant nothing to the storm. It hadn't cared about rank, gender, or pride. It had only cared about timing, about listening. She gave him a curt nod, "Yes, sir," and walked past. Debriefing came at 400 hours. The survivors were in surgery or sleeping under heavy sedation. Sarah sat in the sterile briefing room, uniform still damp, hands trembling under the table. Across from her sat Hayes, and Dr. Warren, the civilian consultant who had quietly defended her earlier. The recorder clicked on. Hayes's voice carried the formality of procedure. "This session documents the events of Rescue Operation Cascade, wherein 8 pilots were recovered following storm interference." He spoke facts, not emotions. He described loss of contact, grid sweeps, and eventual success. He did not describe her being silenced. He did not mention the moment he almost grounded the only chance they had. Sarah bit the inside of her cheek. Jaw flexed, as though he felt the same omission. Finally, Hayes's voice faltered when the record reached the turning point. Lieutenant presented analysis indicating stability windows within the interference cycle. Against my initial judgment, this analysis was applied. Results were accurate. He shifted uncomfortably. For Hayes, it was as close to confession as he could manage. Dr. Warren leaned forward. Accurate is an understatement. Her prediction was the difference between recovery and mass casualty. I recommend full commendation for Lieutenant. Hayes cleared his throat. Recommendation noted. Sarah sat silent. A commendation. Recognition. It sounded hollow. What good was a medal when 8 men nearly died because no one listened sooner? Her voice came low but firm. "Sir, with respect, this wasn't luck. The storm had a pattern, I saw it. I tried to warn you." The words hung heavy. Hayes looked away. Eyes flicked toward her, then back to Hayes, a silent dare to admit it. But Hayes only said, "Noted for record." The next morning, Sarah found herself outside the infirmary. She stood by the window, watching the men inside. Lay pale under white sheets, his chest rising shallow but steady. Others stirred weakly, machines beeping steady rhythms. Relief should have flooded her. Instead, guilt whispered. Why hadn't she spoken louder sooner? If she had pushed harder in that briefing, could she have saved them from crashing in the first place? She pressed her forehead against the glass, whispering into silence, "I should done more." "You did everything." She turned, stood behind her, arms crossed, eyes softened by exhaustion. "I followed instinct," she said bitterly. "That's not doctrine, that's not protocol. I gambled with their lives." He shook his head. "No, you listened, when the rest of us were deaf. That's not a gamble, that's leadership." Her chest ached at the word. Leadership. She hadn't felt like a leader. She had felt like a desperate voice, ignored until it was almost too late. "Hayes will never admit it," continued. "But he knows, everyone does. You carried us through that storm." Sarah looked back at the men in the beds. "I carried them out, but not all of them." The silence stretched. 2 hadn't made it. No amount of success erased that. His voice dropped. "That's the part you'll carry, the part no one else will see, and it's the part that will make you better than the rest of us." She swallowed hard, eyes burning. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that carrying the weight was strength, not failure. But deep down, she knew this wasn't the end of her burden. It was only the beginning. Word spread quickly. By afternoon, Sarah couldn't walk across the base without whispers trailing her. Some voices carried respect, others awe, a few bitterness. "That's her. The one who brought them out." Did you hear she haze? She hated it. The storm had been about life and death, not glory, not gossip. When she passed the hangar, a mechanic paused his work to salute her. She froze, caught off guard. She had done nothing for recognition. She had done it because silence meant death. At the mess hall, two young cadets stared openly until she snapped, "Eat your food." They jumped, embarrassed. She regretted the sharpness instantly. Every glance, every word reminded her she had crossed a line. She had broken silence, command, acted without permission. And though it had saved lives, it had also marked her. Hayes knew it. She could feel his eyes on her during meetings, colder now than before. Not mocking, not dismissive, cold. Recognition could be dangerous. That night Sarah sat alone in the dark barracks, sleep impossible. Rain still tapped the windows, gentler now, but it kept her awake. The storm had ended, but its voice lingered. She closed her eyes, hearing again her father's words. Sometimes permission never comes. Sometimes you take it. He had been right, but he had never told her what came after. The silence, the eyes, the weight of knowing people lived and two didn't. She rubbed her temples, whispering into the empty room, "What if next time I'm wrong?" The question gnawed at her. One wrong instinct, one false read, and she wouldn't be celebrated. She would be court-martialed, or worse, buried. But another thought rose, clearer, sharper. And if I stay silent again? The silence answered for her. The next morning, orders came down. Sarah was to appear before a review panel in 2 days. Officially, it was to debrief her role in Operation Cascade. Unofficially, she knew what it was, a reckoning. Would they commend her, or discipline her for defiance? Either way, she realized something with quiet certainty. She didn't regret her choice. 8 men were alive. That was enough. For now. What's harder, flying into a storm, or facing the people who said you could? The review chamber was nothing like the command center. No flashing lights. No roaring storm outside. Just silence, polished wood, and the steady gaze of 5 officers seated at a long table. Sarah stood alone at the center, her uniform pressed, her boots still scuffed from the mission. The air was heavy with authority. Every breath she took seemed too loud. "Lieutenant," the presiding officer began, a colonel with hair like steel wire. "This proceeding concerns your role in Rescue Operation Cascade. You will answer questions directly. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said. Her voice was steady, though her stomach turned. The colonel glanced down at his notes. "Records indicate you contradicted your superior officer, Captain Hayes, during operational planning. Is this accurate?" Sarah's chest tightened. "Yes, sir." "You insisted on an alternative analysis, unsupported by standing doctrine. Correct?" "Yes, sir." "Yet you were not trained as mission command or rescue operations lead. You are assigned as support. Correct?" "Yes, sir." The colonel's eyes lifted, sharp as a blade. "Then explain why you acted outside your authority." The room seemed to shrink. Sarah's pulse thundered in her ears. She remembered the storm, the voices begging for help, the silence when no one listened. She remembered her father's words. Sometimes permission never comes. She swallowed. Because the data was clear. The interference wasn't random, it was patterned. If we had waited for the next window, the pilots would not have survived. I couldn't stay silent. A murmur rippled among the panel. Hayes shifted in his chair at the side of the room, lips pressed tight. The colonel leaned back. "So, you knowingly the authority of your commanding officer." Her heart clenched. The words sounded harsher than the truth she carried. "I followed the storm, sir, not my ego. The storm doesn't answer to rank." For the first time, silence hung long enough to feel dangerous. The questioning dragged on. They pressed her on timing, on whether her analysis was luck, on why she had volunteered to fly. Each question carried the same undercurrent. Did she overstep? Did she gamble with lives? Finally, a brigadier general spoke. "Lieutenant, Do you understand that had your predictions failed, you would have been responsible for 9 fatalities, including your own? Sarah met his eyes, chest heavy. Yes, sir. And you accepted this risk knowingly. Her throat burned. She thought of his eyes opening in the infirmary, of the young pilot who whispered thank you. She thought of the stretcher that held a body instead of a survivor. Her voice came out quiet but firm. I accepted it because silence was a greater risk. The general studied her, then leaned back. When they dismissed her, Sarah stepped out into the corridor, shoulders sagging as though the storm had followed her indoors. Was waiting, arms crossed, leaning against the wall. Well, he asked. She shook her head. They don't want to decide yet. His jaw tightened. They're looking for a way to save Hayes's pride without burying you. She glanced at him, and if they... His eyes softened. Then you walk away with your honor intact, even if they take your rank. She exhaled slowly. The thought of losing everything she'd built, years of training, sacrifice, endless proving, made her chest ache. But the thought of staying silent that night made her ache worse. Would you have done the same? She asked. His gaze didn't waver. Without hesitation, but I didn't see it. You did, that's the difference. That night Sarah sat outside the infirmary again. The storm had passed completely, leaving the sky eerily clear, stars scattered across blackness. She leaned against the wall, listening to the hum of machines through the glass. Inside stirred awake. His voice was faint when the nurse bent close. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw his hand lift, weak but certain, pointing toward the window, toward her. The nurse followed his gesture, then opened the door. He's asking for you. Sarah froze. Her chest tightened as she stepped inside. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, but his eyes held strength. Lieutenant, he rasped. She stood awkwardly at his bedside. Sir. He coughed weakly, then smiled, thin but real. They told me, you brought us out. I knew someone would. Didn't think it'd be you. Her lips parted, but no words came. Doesn't matter what they say in those rooms, he whispered. We know the truth. You didn't just bring us out. You refused to leave us behind. That's the only thing that matters. Her throat burned. She blinked back, tears, nodding once. Rest, sir, you need strength. But as she left his room, the weight in her chest doubled. If she was court-martialed, her name would be erased. The story would never be told. And yet, he was right. They knew. Sometimes truth only lived in silence. The following day, Sarah was summoned again. The panel chamber felt colder this time. The colonel's voice was firm, deliberate. Lieutenant, this panel has concluded its review. Her breath caught. It is the judgment of this board that your actions during Operation Cascade constituted a deviation from established protocol and chain of command. Her stomach sank. However, the colonel continued, this panel also recognizes that said deviation directly resulted in the survival of 8 personnel, and that your analysis demonstrated extraordinary skill under crisis. A pause. You will not face court-martial. Instead, this panel formally commends you for exceptional courage and initiative. A recommendation for promotion will be submitted. The words hit her like thunder. Commendation, promotion. She should have felt elation. Instead, her chest felt hollow. Hayes shifted uncomfortably, his face pale, lips pressed so tightly they were almost white. He didn't look at her. The colonel finished. Lieutenant, you are dismissed. She saluted, yes, sir, and walked out. The hallway felt too quiet, caught up to her, a half-smile tugging at his lips. Promotion, huh? Not bad for someone they wanted to silence 2 days ago. She exhaled, shaking her head. It doesn't feel like victory. That's because you're measuring it wrong, he said. Victory isn't what the brass hands you. It's the fact those men are breathing today. She wanted to believe him. She wanted his words to lift the weight pressing against her chest. But as she walked outside into the bright morning, she realized the storm inside her hadn't cleared. Yes, she had been vindicated. Yes, she had been recognized. But none of it erased the truth she would always carry: two didn't make it. And no panel, no medal, no promotion could wash that away. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Sarah tightened her grip on her cap and walked across the tarmac, the hum of engines filling the air again. The war would go on, missions would come, and storms would rise. The question was, next time, would anyone listen before it was too late? Why did victory feel lonelier than failure? The applause had faded, the commendations filed, the headlines drafted. Lieutenant Sarah, hero of the Cascade Rescue. That's what the press release called her. Hero. The word rang in her ears every time someone passed her in the corridor and stood, saluted sharper, spoke softer. She had imagined once that recognition would feel like justice, that it would wash away the sting of every time she had been ignored, sidelined, dismissed. But now, walking through the base in her newly pressed uniform with a higher rank stitched to her shoulder, she only felt the hollow echo of distance. The others looked at her differently now, not as the weather girl, not even as one of them. They looked at her as something else, an emblem, a story whispered through the halls. Stories are heavy when you have to carry them alone. At the infirmary, the rescued pilots were recovering slowly, had regained more strength, though his face still bore the pale marks of his ordeal. When Sarah entered his room, he smiled weakly. "You again," he rasped. She pulled a chair beside him. "How's the pain?" He shrugged. "Better than being in that valley." His gaze sharpened. "You really pulled us out of hell." Her throat tightened. "Not alone." "Don't minimize it," he said, voice steady despite his frailty. "We all heard later what happened, how they tried to shut you down, how you flew anyway. That's not just skill, that's something rarer." She looked down at her hands, unsure what to say. Gratitude from him felt heavier than any medal. Studied her. "Do you know why the guys follow me?" She raised an eyebrow. "Because you outrank them." He shook his head. "Because they believe I won't leave them behind. Rank doesn't mean anything if men don't trust your heart." Her chest tightened at his words. He was right. And yet two hadn't come back. The weight of that truth pressed against her ribs. He seemed to read her silence. "You'll carry them forever, but you'll also carry us. Don't confuse the weight for weakness." She swallowed hard. His words struck deeper than he knew. Outside the infirmary, she nearly collided with Hayes. His expression was as rigid as ever, but the arrogance was gone, replaced with something quieter. "Lieutenant," he said, no mockery in his tone, just formality. "Captain," she replied coolly. He studied her, searching her face for something. Perhaps forgiveness, perhaps acknowledgement. She gave him neither. "I was wrong," he said finally. The words were clipped, forced, as though dragged from his chest. "Not just about the storm, about you." Her pulse quickened. She had waited years to hear those words, and now, standing before him, they felt empty. "I don't need your apology," she said softly. "I needed your trust when it mattered." The flicker in his eyes told her the words struck deep, but she didn't linger. She walked past, leaving him with his silence. Days turned into weeks. The mission was written into reports, circulated through channels, celebrated in articles with carefully chosen words. But in the quiet hours, Sarah wrestled with a question that wouldn't leave her. What if she had been wrong? Every storm after felt heavier, every shift in the wind more dangerous. Not because of what she couldn't see, but because now everyone was watching her to see it. In the simulator, cadets whispered about her predictions. In the hangar, mechanics asked if she could sense the air. Teased her once, saying she had become a legend before her career even started. Legends are dangerous things. They can break under their own weight. One evening, she sat alone on the runway, watching the horizon darken into twilight. The quiet was almost painful after so much noise. She closed her eyes and let the wind brush against her face, listening the way her father had taught her. The air carried stories no one else heard, But this time, it whispered a question she couldn't ignore. How many storms can you walk into before one swallows you whole? It was Hayes who brought that question back to life. It was a young cadet, barely 20. He stopped her outside the mess hall, nervous, holding a tray like a shield. "Lieutenant, sir, ma'am," he stammered. I wanted to say I was in the command center that night, when you argued with Captain Hayes." She tilted her head, curious. The cadet swallowed. "I didn't say anything. I didn't back you up. I thought you were probably right, but I didn't want to be wrong in front of everyone." His voice shook with shame. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry, and thank you for not staying quiet like I did." Her chest ached. She studied his earnest face, saw the fear she used to carry mirrored in his eyes. "You'll have your storm someday," she said quietly. "When it comes, don't wait for permission. Listen, trust yourself." He nodded quickly, eyes wide with relief. She watched him walk away and realized something sharp and painful. She wasn't just carrying her own storms anymore. Others were measuring their courage against hers. That was the true cost of leadership. Not just acting, but becoming the proof that others could act too. Later that week, found her sitting alone in the hangar, staring at the helicopters lined up in perfect symmetry. "You're brooding again," he said lightly, dropping onto the bench beside her. She smirked faintly, just thinking. "Dangerous habit," he teased, then his tone softened. "What's eating you?" She sighed. "Everyone thinks I'm fearless now, but I wasn't fearless that night. I was terrified, I still am." Leaned back, arms crossed. "Fear isn't the enemy, silence is. You didn't let fear stop you, that's the only difference." She looked at him, his steady eyes, the lines of exhaustion around them. "Do you really believe that? Or are you just trying to keep me from falling apart?" "Both," he admitted, and they both laughed quietly. The laugh faded into silence, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was shared. The days blurred. Recovery continued. Missions resumed. Life on base went on as if the storm had never happened. But Sarah knew better. The storm had marked her, not with scars on her body, but with a weight in her soul. She would never forget the sound of static breaking with a desperate voice, the sight of beacons blinking weakly in the dark, the feel of a helicopter trembling under the rage of the sky. She would never forget that 2 didn't make it, and she would never forget that 8 did, because she didn't stay silent. As she walked the runway one evening, the sky burned gold with sunset. Pilots prepared for training flights, laughter echoing faintly across the tarmac. She stood still, breathing in the wind. Sometimes, she realized, storms weren't just in the sky. They were in the rooms where voices tried to drown each other out. They were in the silence where doubt grew heavy. And she had survived one storm, but she knew more would come. The question was no longer whether she would act. The question was whether she could carry the weight each storm left behind. What remains when the storm is over? The base had returned to rhythm, the kind that chewed days into routine and spat them out again. Engines lifted and landed. Orders were given. Reports filed. Soldiers moved with the same steady march. The world spun on as if the Cascade rescue had been nothing more than a blip on the long chain of military history. But Sarah felt the storm everywhere. Not in the sky, not in the weather, but in herself, in the quiet of the barracks, in the stares that lingered when she walked into a room, in the way people spoke to her now, half respect, half hesitation, as if unsure whether she was still one of them. She hadn't asked to be a symbol, she had only wanted to be heard. And now that she was, she felt lonelier than ever. The official commendation ceremony arrived on a cold morning. Rows of soldiers stood at attention, uniforms sharp, boots polished. Cameras clicked. Flags rippled against a pale sky. Her name was called and she stepped forward. A general pinned the medal to her chest, words flowing with practiced solemnity. "For extraordinary courage, initiative, and devotion to duty, Lieutenant Sarah is hereby commended." Applause thundered. The cameras flashed. She saluted, accepted the medal, then stepped back into line. It should have felt like triumph. Instead, it felt like theater. She saw Hayes standing to the side, applauding with the rest. His face was unreadable. Not mockery, not pride, just a mask. And maybe that was the truth, that no medal, no apology, no recognition could change the silence that had almost killed 8 men. After the ceremony, officers congratulated her. Cadets asked for photos, clapped her on the shoulder and whispered, "Breathe it in. You earned this." But as she looked down at the metal pinned to her chest, all she could think of was the stretcher that carried a body instead of a survivor. The storm had given her this medal. The storm had also taken 2 names that would never be called again. What kind of victory was that? That evening, Sarah found herself on the edge of the airstrip, alone. The sun bled into the horizon, painting the world in soft gold. She held the medal in her hand, having unpinned it from her uniform. It felt heavy, colder than she expected. She turned it over, watching light glint off the surface. What did this piece of metal really mean? That she had done something no one else dared? Or that she had been forced to choose between silence and defiance and nearly lost everything in the process? The sound of footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. She glanced back. It was moving slowly with the aid of a cane, his recovery still ongoing. "You skipped the reception," he said, voice rough but tinged with humor. "I wasn't hungry," she replied softly. He eased himself down onto the edge of the tarmac beside her, grunting with the effort. For a moment they sat in silence, watching the sky fade. "You think too much," he said finally. She smirked faintly. "That's what saved you, remember?" He chuckled, then grew serious. "I know what you're thinking, that the medal doesn't matter, that the storm took 2 of us, that no ceremony can change it." She looked at him sharply. He had read her too easily. He tapped his cane against the ground. "You're right. The medal doesn't matter. Neither does Hayes. What matters is this: when it came down to silence or action, you chose action. And that's why I'm sitting here. That's why 6 others are alive." Her throat burned, but 2 would have been 10, he cut in firmly. "You can't carry the dead without remembering the living too. If you don't, the weight will break you." His words hit deep, sharp as truth. She stared at the medal one last time, then slipped it into her pocket. Not because she rejected it, but because it wasn't what defined her. Weeks passed. She settled into her new role with quiet determination. She was invited to speak at briefings now, her analysis no longer dismissed. Cadets leaned forward when she taught them about weather patterns, as though she carried secret knowledge. But Sarah didn't bask in it. She kept her tone even, her posture steady. Respect earned through storms was fragile. She would not abuse it. Hayes avoided her mostly, though once their eyes met across the operations room. For a moment, she saw something raw flicker there, regret, perhaps, or shame. She didn't return it. Some silences didn't need to be broken. Remained steady at her side, offering dry humor, subtle guidance, the quiet reassurance that she wasn't carrying everything alone. But even he seemed to sense the weight she bore that no one else could touch. Late at night she would lie awake, listening to the hum of distant engines, the whisper of wind against the windows. Every sound reminded her that storms would come again, and when they did, the question would rise once more. Would she speak? Would she act? The answer came easily now. Yes, always. One evening she returned to the runway where it had all begun. The night was calm, the stars bright against the black sky. She closed her eyes, breathing deep. The air was quiet, steady, no storm this time. And yet she felt the storm still within her, not as a weight now, but as a part of her. A reminder that silence could be as deadly as thunder, that sometimes dignity wasn't loud, wasn't applauded, wasn't decorated. Sometimes it was simply the act of refusing to leave someone behind. Her father's voice returned in memory, soft and sure. "Sometimes permission never comes. Sometimes you take it." She opened her eyes, gazing out across the endless dark where mountains met the sky. She thought of Alive, of the cadet who thanked her for speaking when he hadn't, of Steady in the storm, of Hayes, silent in his shame, and of the two who hadn't made it, whose names she carried like quiet prayers. The wind brushed against her face, gentle now. She closed her eyes, whispering into the night. "I hear you." The silence answered. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And Sarah walked back into the light, carrying her storm with her.